Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. If you are listening for the first time, I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of hardcore IT security, IT business leadership, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and fearless living principles. Welcome to the show. Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Red Zone podcast, where I invite IT security innovators, leading entrepreneurial minds, and wildly inspiring individuals to share their stories and offer best tips to help you achieve success in IT security, and business leadership. I'm your host, Bill Murphy, and in today's show, I'm excited to bring to you my interview with John Gomes. He's a man dedicated to thinking differently about strategy and innovation of people in the workplace. And he's the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, The Way We're Working Isn't Working. And he's founder and chairman of the Energy Project UK, which helps organizations build sustainable, high-performance cultures by teaching people the importance of energy. So I titled this episode, Energy Beats Talent with Top IT Leaders. Why? Well, as machines take over the world, and I say this only half jokingly, and eventually through AI, machine learning, deep learning, and robotics help us tackle some of the biggest tech issues with cybersecurity, there remains the question, do we have the human capacity to keep up with email, much less the pace of innovation and change? John explains how you can do this. He also discusses where human competitive advantage will be. Energy is the capacity to do work, but do you have the energy needed to do your work? He talks about how the days of skills and will are over. So this means you must tap the third dimension, which is capacity and energy. So we explore energy and capacity. The effort, and he talks about effort and renewal is critical because of the issues of being present and fully energized for our teams. As a leader, if we're not managing from our full capacity, it's difficult for your teams to be amplified by your presence. So my biggest learning takeaways from this that I hope you'll gain from this as well is the importance of a leader to be able to have lateral thinking, be able to handle paradoxical thinking in order to make better relationships, forming high value relationships, and reminding us to have depth of insight, to have time for reflection and renewal, and wider width of thinking, and how to speed up your thought by slowing down, and the importance of creating space for time to think and having a massive transformational purpose. And then finally, seeing connections. So with this, I want to welcome you to my conversation with John Gomes. And I want to welcome you to the show today.
Pleasure, Bill. Good to see you again.
I had to have you back on the show because I had so much fun with our conversation last year. And I thought we could start off by talking a bit about, you're famous for saying energy beats talent. That's me labeling you as famous. I don't think you have that worldwide renown for energy beats talent, but it always strikes me when you say that, because there's a fundamental knowing that I get that that's true. But why is that true? Could you explain for my listeners a little bit about kind of why you say that and sort of the underpinnings of that statement?
Well, I think we all know that's true at some level. That regardless of how skilled, talented, and motivated that you are, if you wake up and you're having a bad day, you're angry, frustrated, distracted, your ability to translate what you know and your talent into value, particularly with other people, is limited, or it may be actually marginal. So what we have learned over the course of the last 25 years through this concept of the science of high performance, this diverse field of subjects all coming together to really show us how we design to perform at our best, is that as the world has got more frantic, as the pace of change, driven largely by IT and globalization, has become more intense, then the game changer often is how we show up. Are we open and receptive? Do we have energy? Are we positive or are we closed? Because the decisions we make when we're on the negative side of that equation and the value that we create in relationships is the defining factor of how the velocity, the success of outcomes, whether we really make decisions or whether we just perpetuate the discussion. All of those things are limited and defined by our energy. So if I look at two teams, and at the moment I'm working with two really creative organizations. One has no energy and the other has an abundance of it. And there is probably a 7 to 8 times difference in their bottom line performance. One's on fire and one's failing and about to go out of business. And they've got an abundance of the talent on paper. So that's the difference I'm talking about.
So the company that is 7 to 8 times bottom line better, you're saying that there's an abundance of energy at that organization, although did you say they're equivalent in talent?
Yes, okay. They have got, and in some cases they probably don't have the same number of superstars, but what they have got is vision, and they've got a commitment to recognizing and valuing the concept of energy as a precious resource that's the basis, the foundation of sustainable high performance. Without that, what you're always doing is you're trading on people's track record, on their commitment and loyalty, and you're draining the tank rather than renewing it. That's an unsustainable way of looking at the world.
So I want to build upon this concept of unsustainable, and so most of my listeners are going to be the high performance types that are leaders in their organizations, and primarily forward facing with the technology. So they're essentially, they've got their hands in the till, so to speak, of what is partially one of the issues, is that how does a human being show up? So you mentioned is how we show up can be a game changer. That's a big bite to chew off for you. But what are some of the top 1 or 2 or 3 ways someone can fundamentally reevaluate how they show up at work in the midst of the pace, the pace as we know it?
So if you think of the typical definition of high performance, it's skill and will. It's this person's determined to be successful and they're smart. They're the smartest person that you can find. The third dimension, which is their capacity or their energy, is really simple to define, but it's up until this point it's been non-business relevant. It's not something that we can talk about because it hasn't been either politically correct or recognized as something that actually has an influence on outcomes. So none of this will come as a surprise to your listeners, Bill, but if let's imagine you've got a really talented person. There are 4 ways in which their capacity shows up. At a physical level, it's governed by how they're sleeping, how they're eating, how they're exercising, and probably more counterintuitively by the way in which they marshal their energy through the day, through periodization. Because we're not designed to just expend energy continuously. We're designed to sprint and recover. So at a physical level, it's about the quantity. Does this person have the ability to fuel their performance on a sustainable basis? Are they as good at 10 o'clock as they are at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? The second dimension is their emotional energy. Despite what you say about being positive and wanting to be constructive and solve problems and so on, how are they actually emotionally? How much time do they spend in a agitated, critical, negative, defensive, or aggressive state, regardless of the fact that they might be quite skillful at masking those things with a poker face? But that emotional state is defining in terms of 2 things. One, in terms of the way in which they frame problems and how they make decisions, and whether they defend the status quo and themselves, or whether they are open to the fact that they might be wrong. In our world, making decisions around technology implementations, the application of algorithms, all of those things, the underpinning idea that's driving our world at the moment is lean startup and the test, learn, fail, pivot cycle. Unless you're in a high positive emotional state, you don't make good decisions around that stuff. You're not open to the fundamental question that sits at the bottom of that is, how could I be wrong? If you want to learn fast, you have to be open to the fact that you might be wrong, and you need to be okay with it. So at an emotional level, that's a really profound difference between a high performer in a performance state as opposed to a survival state.
So you're saying that it starts out with skill and will. That was kind of the old paradigm, and now
Yeah.
you're saying that it's what we couldn't do because it was a little bit harder to measure and was not as popular politically or scientifically, was this capacity, like a human capacity and energy is kind of that third dimension that you really focus on, right? And
Yeah.
one of those elements is the emotional, and I guess you were just getting into the second one?
Well, no, the first one's physical. The second one is emotional.
Got
so
it.
the first thing, I mean, so let's tackle that point around the lack of quantifiable data in this. So we conducted a study amongst 20,000 people worldwide with the Harvard Business Review, where they validated the data and correlated the outcomes. And I can run through some of the highlights of that, but very simple things that we all know are good for us start to take on a very significant perspective when you think about them in the terms of performance. So an employee who takes a break every 90 minutes is 40% more able to think creatively. They have nearly a third better focus. In other words, their ability to concentrate and be productive. So, just very small changes.
Why is that though? Like, I'm really interested in the science of it. Is there any, like, either general science reasons why?
There is a profound scientific cause for this. Our bodies are governed by a series of cycles that the body runs on clocks that in the brain. And one of those, we all know about the circadian rhythm, for example, our 24-hour work-rest cycle. But within that is something that most of us have seen sometime when they look at a graph on sleep patterns during night. That's called the ultradian rhythm. And researchers understand that now to run through the body 24/7. So in other words, your performance rhythm is on a 90-minute cycle. Every 90 minutes, your body is going from a physiological peak to a physiological trough. In other words, at the end of a 90-minute expenditure of energy, in a meeting, focusing on your email, whatever it is, whatever that task is, at the end of that period, your body is screaming out for a break. And when you do not do that, your performance starts to nosedive. And of course, you can go through 2 or 3 of these ultradian sprints fueled with coffee and the natural buzz of the early day. But what that means is that you get a deficit, you get a depletion over the course of the day, and the back end of the day is less productive. But you keep on doing that, you become progressively less able to perform at your best during the week, which means that many people, at the end of the week, they're wired through the buildup of stress and cortisol, which they haven't broken down through naturally, but they're exhausted. And so, their weekends are less than productive as a result. But more importantly, this is really simple to counter with awareness and some very simple techniques. And at the heart of it, it's recognizing that the human body is designed to work on a wave principle about expending energy and intermittently recovering it. And we're great at expending it, but we do not consider the recovery cycle as being valuable. And when we do, then we embrace something that was learned out of sports a long time ago, which is that fitness is defined as the speed of recovery. So our challenge in our ever-accelerating world is to get better at getting renewal in very short and efficient periods of time so that we can sprint and perform at our best for these short, intermittent breaks. Sprint, recover, sprint, recover.
Yeah, I think that's one of my concerns, just coming back from Singularity University and just kind of really diving into these exponential technologies and what's driving them, is really the fundamental question: how can a human being participate in a world that's accelerating? Because pretty soon that we are going to have, and we're already there, it's just a matter of time, but the world is going to go faster than our human brain has the ability to respond. And so how do we raise our performance? And I know that's a sneaky word, performance, because sometimes when I hear that, I go, you mean I got to go faster? When in many ways it seems like you're saying, well, we need to perform better, but doesn't mean necessarily we're sprinting harder.
No, I mean, I think if you look at this sine wave concept and you think about what performance looks like increasing the amplitude of that expenditure wave. So if you were using the analogy of a sprinter or a swimmer or somebody, you want to go faster or longer, and so that wave has to go higher. But the corollary for that is that the recovery wave needs to go deeper. In the context of the exponential organization that Singularity have identified as being this massive disruptive force and also the future of more and more industries. We have to ask ourselves, what is human performance about? And I think as we have more algorithms automating work, human beings will still be able to do two things that computers will never be able to do, or not in my lifetime at least. I'm not worrying about it just yet. And that is to make decisions, to take responsibility for difficult calls that are mired in paradox and conflict, and also to form and sustain high-value human relationships that require trust to get things done. And you can't outsource those things to computers wholly. And so actually, if you look at it, all of that requires us to be more human, to be more creative, to be more drawing into the depths of using insight and our rational problem-solving techniques. And if I look at organizations, and I was with one of the world's largest companies yesterday talking to their global head of people, and this is exactly what they were saying. We need our people to be more human. We need, the rewards in the future are diminishing in terms of money. Those things are diminishing in terms of what they're going to bring people. What people want is a better experience of working with each other. And
that's so correct. Keep going. I don't mean to. I'll jump in at the end.
I just think the typical day, and I'm thinking about myself and people I coach. They get in the morning. They've got 200 emails. That's the first thing they do, and then they cram those in before a meeting that they really don't understand what they're there to do. They spoof their way through it, and if they're the leader, they pretend they know what they're doing because they can't admit it. They go back to back. They're too busy to even think about metabolizing the contents and decisions from one meeting to the next. So that builds up a kind of psychological burden in their minds, which means that they react negatively to difficult challenges and problems to solve. They can't go to the toilet because there's no space in their diary to do it because people fill up every available gap with another phone call or a meeting. They don't eat until 4 o'clock in the afternoon until they're starving. And so they chomp something down and, they push off the most important pressing work that requires depth and reflection and creativity till the end of the day. And by the time they get there, they're running on empty, and they don't have any energy. So they just do more emails because that's easier. And so it goes on. When I meet somebody who's in that state, distracted, exhausted, negative, hey, that's going to be fun, isn't it? So, and many leaders are in that space on a regular basis. And, some of the things that we have learned about how you disrupt that positively are not time dependent. They're a mindset shift. We help with that mindset shift by getting people to think about the science of how they're designed to perform at their best. And then some very simple behavioral shifts that don't take a lot of time. They're really just changing the way you currently do things, but they make a big difference to that question, which is, how are you showing up right now?
The biggest things, and I spend a lot of time as I run a technology business, I'm learning about these exponential technologies as they impact our future, and with machine learning and robots and deep learning and potentially outsourcing of different job capabilities. You're absolutely right. I think speed does not. It really gets in the way of lateral thinking, paradoxical thinking. These are the words that you used. High value relationships, being more human, more creative, depth of insight, reflection, and especially with in the making decisions in technology, there's so much complexity involved with decision making that the ability to think laterally and jump and make conclusions. It seems to me that what you're talking about is a complete different shift to kind of a wider, more expansive way to approach problems, which is the opposite of speed thinking.
Yes. So the work that Singularity has done on the exponential organization starts with the thing that most organizations are not doing at the moment, which is the massive transformational purpose. Most organizations today, the big established organizations, are in the short-term rational mode of thinking of how do we defend the status quo? What's the smartest way of exploiting what we've already got? Because they don't have any time to think. And guess what? Dreaming up a massive transformational purpose is an act of creativity. It requires people to be in that space where they have the time to think. They have the time to expand, to go deeper, longer, wider in their debates. It's not that it's soft or it's quantifiable, but until you get to that moment, that aha moment of kind of like this massive transformational purpose in your mind, then you're not going to create an energy behind the organization that will enable it to turn into something that can truly disrupt the status quo. So, leaders who don't give themselves permission to create that space for themselves to be truly at their best are not being leaders. They are, they're managers of the status quo.
So let's get into some specifics individually that some of the leaders listening that give some concrete things that they can do themselves to maybe test some assumptions here. If we're looking at the science of these periodic rhythms, of these 90-minute rhythms that you say really have a deep impact on our bodies, what are some of the break examples that people can do that a leader can test themselves for the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. The good news is that the answers are very simple. At the basis of all of this is the notion that recovery or a break is the opposite of what you're currently doing. That's really important. You're not kidding yourself that you're having a break. So walking to the bathroom and looking at your BlackBerry at the same time is not a break. Changing the channel of work is not a break. So if you were sitting down for 4 hours, then standing up is literally a break. It's the opposite of what you're doing. It's that simple. So the kind of things that help people to get recovery in a short period of time are all about trying to absorb themselves in a way that allows their brain to just calm down. In eBay, when we were working with groups there, quite a lot of young folk love music. The smartest way for them to get recovery is to put headphones on and to have 2 or 3 songs in a playlist that they know they can listen to for 3 or 4 minutes and close their eyes and just listen to that music. And if they're angry, upset, burnt out, they need to listen to something calming that will chill them down. If they're actually exhausted, maybe they need to rev up for a presentation or something like that. They might need to listen to something that stirs them and makes them feel excited. Ultimately, it's about losing yourself for the moment. So teaching people to do mindfulness and to do breathing exercises and so on is probably the smartest way to get recovery in 2 or 3 minutes in a very, very practical way. Because what it does is it teaches the brain that it can switch off. When you do something that's repetitive and doesn't really have much purpose but absorbs the right brain, then what happens is the left brain, the one that's talking, chattering at you, going, come on, come on, come on, that switches off, it gets bored. That's why your best ideas come to you in a walk or in the shower or when you're cycling, because that part of the brain, the rational part, is switching off with the repetitive, and that allows the creative brain to become dominant. That's such a powerful resource for people to have. So in some ways, recovery, 2 or 3 things that you get from those recovery breaks are physiologically, the body is stilling down, so you're getting physiological recovery. Emotionally, when you relax, cortisol and adrenaline levels start to fall very rapidly. But more importantly, I think from a cognitive point of view, the part of your brain that you need to be able to see the big picture, to make links between things, to come up with those insights, switches into dominant mode. And we need to have more of the day where we're engineering our creative brain to be switched on, because that's when you have a new point of view. That's when you get these flashes of insight, and motivation really quickly follows suit. When your team sees you kind of in that state where you're excited about the possibilities of doing something new, that's what they want from you.
Because that's the energy piece, because they're picking up on your energy, which then amplifies across the team, and then maybe that's what you're picking up with that company that's getting that 7 or 8x difference in performance.
Yes. Well, that company, incidentally, has completely modeled itself on this 90-minute way. So no meeting is allowed to go longer than 90 minutes. In fact, they try and do meetings that are 15 and 30 minutes. And it's not to constrain people, although constraint sometimes can be very possible. It's to say most of our meetings in the past were, like 20 minutes strung out to an hour because they were inefficient and because we didn't know what we were trying to decide upon. The agendas were far too long, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, if we manage that element of it and are disciplined about our physiological needs, then the meetings become inherently much more enjoyable and productive.
Well, and also, I think we missed. I don't want to skip over this part because I think it's really powerful. One is that you mentioned that by taking these breaks, not with your phone in your hand, but you're actually either breathing or you're have headphones on and you're quieting your body and mind down and bringing your cortisol levels down and emotionally being settled. Is that you made a key point here? It flips on the part of your brain that is the most creative area, that makes these unusual distinctions, is highly energized. It has the ability. It's that leadership part of your brain. And what area of brain would that be? Is that more of that executive functioning side of the brain, or?
The science has moved on dramatically. So we used to have this notion of left and right brain. What we now recognize increasingly with neuroscience is that the brain has a series of interconnected networks. So, I think the simplest way of regarding this is that you have a logical, analytical part of your brain that runs off verbal reasoning. So when you're talking, you're using that part of your brain. And it's all part of the prefrontal cortex. There are areas of the prefrontal cortex that are dedicated to this, but it's not in that convenient left and right sense. But that's sequential. It's narrow reasoning. It's reductive. It's based on what you know, and it loves numbers and words. And often we don't know what we think until we start talking, and then all of a sudden we've got this very cogent argument that appeared from nowhere. That's your verbal reasoning brain. The part of your brain that's responsible for emotion, for imagery, for seeing the connections between things, really happens in that kind of relaxed state where you're actively not thinking. And you can encourage it through physical exercise, and you can encourage it through walking. I mean, there's a study that was done last year that shows that people are 60% more creative in walking meetings. And that in part is because the physical nature and the rhythmic nature of movement that we all experience when we're taking the dog for a walk, ideas pop into our head, distracts you from that, the total focus on your verbal reasoning brain. And all of a sudden, new insights and perspectives start to emerge. And what I guess I'm arguing for is that very little of our day now, there's any space for that. And very little of our lives are any space for that. And what happens as a result of that is our thinking narrows down, our worlds narrow down, and our companies narrow down into expediency, which is, what do we need to do right now to get this sorted? And eventually what you do is you just draw down from the well until there's nothing left. And sometimes people feel like that at the end of the week. They've just given everything and they've got nothing left. But, if you sum that up, the organization becomes less and less creative, less and less orientated to what's happening in the world, and therefore less and less relevant. And I think that's why many companies that don't constantly think experimental as the mindset are going to become embattled and defensive. And, they'll be looking at these creative organizations and saying, yeah, it's okay for Google, it's okay for Facebook to be like that. We could never do that. And the part that's true is because you're never going to give yourself permission to allow yourself to actually think. And arguing, look at my schedule, there's no time in my day. Ultimately that's just a victim mindset that's allowed to be pervasive in the worldview of that organization. And then it becomes true. It becomes a foregone conclusion.
I just got back from an event, a seminar I went to in Poland on cold water immersion and training on how to essentially be in very, very cold water and change your physiological state so you can be able to do that. And it was interesting, the power of breathing. I always thought that breathing was important, as I always felt better after I came back from my runs, probably because I was breathing a lot. But I actually didn't realize the enormous difference that it did in a very stressful situation like being in massively cold water. And so I've been experimenting a lot with breathing normally recently. And have you seen the difference in the way people breathe with your leaders in the work you're doing and the energy?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful point you're raising here because, yes, absolutely. We've done various experiments over the years looking at some of the kind of really fundamental aspects of the physiology of people in the workplace. And I think the breathing is probably too generous a word. People are panting most of the time at work. They're breathing from the top 10 to 20% of their lungs in a sort of stress state, and it creates a negative reaction, producing more stress hormones. So when you ask people to try and breathe deeply in a session, they almost can't. It's like, what?
Yeah, right.
It's too hard for them. And as we know, athletes breathe deeply through their nose and out through their mouth because it allows their lungs to perform much more, efficiently, and it alters the shift from the sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, and that's when they burn much more fat. So there's so many benefits for this. I mean, I relate to that experience of cold water. I did a polar plunge in the Antarctic a few years ago and jumped into super cooled water with a pair of swimming trunks. The preparation I went through to be able to not pass out. I had a rope around me, so at least I wasn't going to die. But the breathing was at the center of it, and
yep.
I'm not a hard man. I'm not one of these people that does Ironman triathletes or anything like that. I did it because it was a psychological challenge as part of this Leadership on the Edge event that I'd spent a month on Antarctica. And it was remarkable just what a shift in your consciousness around breathing can do. Because if you think that is the most fundamental rhythm that we control in our bodies. We control our breathing, we can control our heart rate, we can control our brain waves, all as a result of doing that. And the ancient traditions of meditation, at their root, are not really spiritual. They're about gaining control of your attention.
It's a physiology, right? Tapping into the physiology is at a real physical level.
Absolutely. And by doing that, you alter your brain state. Change in your brain state can affect so many things. And then neuroscience is now catching up and providing the evidence to what happens to your brain with all of that. And I think it's no kind of mistake that a lot of tech companies have embraced meditation and mindfulness because they like the idea that you can take more control over your body. And I think the shift here, one final thing I wanted to say before I stop talking for a moment, is that the shift is from I have a body to I am a body. Most of us think of our body as something that's not ours. It's not. Mm-hmm. It's something that we have, that we use, like a car. We are a body.
Yeah. Well, I think also the definition of which you're really speaking of, the mindfulness and the meditation. I think that is amazingly powerful. But I think that the physical aspect of tapping the physiology through breathing is sometimes people can't access the meditation and the mindfulness as easily if they're not trained in that or willing to be open to it. But the body piece you just mentioned is tapping that through breathing. It's almost a direct hack. It's a direct hack in the system that, and at least in my experience, that you're actually tapping right into the physiology of the body to experience essentially the benefits that you need as far as, I liken it to rebooting a computer. That's how I've been explaining it, where sometimes you just get so much crap on your computer, you just need to reboot it. And it's like, how do you reboot your body? And I found the easiest way is through that breathing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great analogy. And what you're rebooting is you're enforcing that renewal break, which means you're more likely now to be on the up curve afterward. You're lowering your stress hormones, which means you're getting some emotional recovery. So you're cleansing out some of that stuff that isn't frankly designed to be in your body at the levels it is at the moment. And if you get good at doing this, then you can create a clean mental sheet. The slate, you can write the slate clean so that you can fully engage at it from an attention point of view and what you're doing next, rather than having that overlapping into what you're doing right now. So I think it's a great analogy.
When you're training companies, John, do you actually do you try to have a couple key individuals that you can work with and train on these concepts first before you can try to permeate it into the culture of an organization? And I guess the reason I'm asking that is it more advantageous for you to find people who are kind of willing participants versus people that are like, yet another way to optimize my day? So how do you approach this from a company point of view?
Well, I think we don't start with trying to persuade people, here are 5 cool hacks.
Okay.
Because you're right, everybody's inundated. That's part of the problem. There's an abundance of advice. So every day, Fast Company, Inc. magazine, Wired send me, a Harvard Business Review. Everybody's sending me ways in which I can live my life better. And sometimes I want to tell them to go away.
Sure.
Like enough advice already. I think the most important thing is when you pause for a moment and you count the cost of how you're currently doing things. You've got to start with that. You've got to start with what the cost opportunity is on something so that you feel motivated to want to change it. And actually changing one thing at a time is really important, because if we have anything that we know about human beings is that we have a limited reservoir of willpower and discipline. If you try and make wholesale change, you're likely to fail because you're diluting that very limited reservoir across multiple things. And so your intention, the good intention, the New Year's resolution, quickly fades with reality. So I think it's really important to start by narrowing down on something small and something quite narrowly defined that is fundamental about how you're designed to perform well. So, if you look at the parameters of physical, there's sleep, nutrition, exercise, movement, and how you recover during the day, this 90-minute rhythm that you're on. And many people try and tackle 3 or 4 of those things at the same time, and they give up after 6 or 7 attempts. So I think the thing to do is to understand which of those factors is most influencing why you're tired, why you are impatient with your family, why you are unable to get around to the most important work, because that's the fuel in your tank. And if you can provide yourself with some quantifiable evidence that by making this small change that you can get more capacity, that becomes a virtuous cycle, because who doesn't want more energy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a precious resource that who would not want a way to have more of it. What exactly, just as we wrap up, what would you recommend for people listening if you could put one sticker in everybody's laptop or PC of all the companies you've worked with and all the individuals that will hear this message? What is the one thing that you would put on that Post-it note if you could put one on their laptop?
Well, I mean, I think it's value renewal. It's breathe, it's take a break. But I want to kind of imbue that, ennoble that, the idea of renewal as being the most fundamental aspect of what makes you a human being. Our most important energy need is to expend energy and to recover it. So we're all great at expending it, but if we don't value recovery, and people are sleeping less and less well, they're taking less breaks as demand goes up. So I suppose, the thing is, what makes me human is I can renew. And what a computer does is it doesn't renew. A computer doesn't need to renew. A computer keeps on working till it breaks down and then you throw it away. But, human beings are designed to pulse. So I would say be human, pulse, make waves.
I like that. And, it's not be human and make waves. I think that is so true, because we are not that many generations removed from a very physical life most of us would have had to have lived. And most of us in the Western world are working with computers all day long, and so we would have had to build recovery into our day from physical labor. We were probably breathing much harder, working harder physically, and it's interesting sort of the concepts you're bringing in this breaks and renewals. We would have had that as human beings.
Yeah, well, governments universally around the world through the 40s, 50s, and 60s arrived on the 7-hour working day as being, the limit of what people can do. And they didn't do it, they didn't do it for any other reason than the science showed that that's what. So as we work longer hours and more continuously, if we're not taking breaks, then, the costs are really going to rack up.
This has been a fascinating discussion, as always, John, and I really appreciate your time being on the show again, and I hope we can do this again soon. So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.